The 2026 FIFA World Cup draw is just a few days away, and the best way to prepare for it is by simulating the entire group stage. So I spent the last few days looking for a World Cup simulator that has all the rules and regulations that FIFA outlined in their draw process last week, and I finally came across this one. Now I'll leave a link to this website in the description in case you want to do some simulations and see how your World Cup group stage draw pans out. But the way this video is going to work is we're going to run 3 simulations, and at the end of the video I'm going to pick which one out of the 3 is my favorite and which one I think would make for the best World Cup group stage at next year's tournament. So with that being said, we have our first run here. We have all the rules, we have all the things outlined right here for the tournament qualification, the tournament format, and we're going to simulate the complete draw right now. So for this first run, before we get into the groups here, we're going to actually look at the playoffs, because in this simulation it actually tells you which nations are going to win the playoff paths for both the European qualifiers and the Interconfederation playoffs. So in playoff path A, the simulation says that Italy will qualify as a pot 4 team. In playoff path B, we have Ukraine qualifying as well. In playoff path C, we have Turkey qualifying. And in playoff path D, we have Denmark qualifying. So pretty much all the favorites in the European qualifiers in this first simulation are going to be pot 4 teams. And I'm looking at the Interconfederation playoffs. We have DR Congo qualifying as a pot 4 team and Iraq qualifying as a pot 4 team. So with that being said, let's look at the group stage. Let's look at what this first simulation came up for the groups. So Group A, we have Mexico, Ivory Coast, Japan, and Italy as the playoff path A winners. Now this would be a really interesting group. I think this would be a really good test for Mexico to see if they can make it out of this group, and then especially if Italy are in here to see how they finally played the World Cup at their first tournament since 2014. Ivory Coast can always pull off an upset. Japan are really interesting to watch. I think this Group A would actually be pretty sick. Moving on to Group B, we have Canada, New Zealand, Norway, Senegal. This would be absolutely insane. This would be a great test for Canada's men's national team to see what they're made of. I think honestly Norway would probably top this group with relative ease, but the fight for second place between Canada and Senegal would be pretty interesting. Group C, we have Netherlands, Croatia, Iraq as the Interconfederation playoff winners, and Tunisia. So here really the battle would just be between the Netherlands and Croatia. I don't think Tunisia or Iraq would really put on much of a fight, but that match between those two teams would be really interesting. Group D, we have the United States, Saudi Arabia, Uruguay, and Ukraine. This would be pretty interesting as well. I think the US honestly would have a decent chance at topping this group if Uruguay slipped up. But honestly, it wouldn't be, out of the 3 like host nation groups A, B, and D, I think honestly this one is probably my least favorite. So it's okay. Looking at Group E, we have Argentina, we have DR Congo as the Interconfederation playoff winners, we have Uzbekistan, and we have Switzerland. I think this group would be a walk in the park for Argentina. I don't think any of the other nations would put up too much of a fight. Maybe Uzbekistan, if they got a win over Switzerland, they could finish in the 2nd place in this group, but honestly Argentina would just cruise their way through this one. Looking at Group F, you have Portugal, Colombia, Ghana, and Panama. This would actually be a really interesting group. I think honestly the way Portugal are playing right now, they could top it, but Colombia have also been playing really well, so I think it would be a really interesting game between those two. Between Ghana and Panama, whoever finishes 3rd, it's kind of a toss-up, but honestly Group F probably would be one of the most interesting that we've seen so far. Group G, we have Brazil, Algeria, Austria, and Jordan. Now this honestly would be a pretty interesting test for this current Brazilian team. They're not the strongest team going to next year's World Cup. Austria were pretty solid in the qualifiers, Algeria were pretty decent. It's Jordan's first ever World Cup, so maybe they could pull off an upset. I think Brazil would have qualified out of this group in probably 1st place. They would definitely get at least 2nd, but I don't think it'd be too much of a test for this Brazilian side. Moving on to Group H, we have Germany, Cape Verde, Paraguay, and South Korea. Honestly, yeah, for Germany, like apart from South Korea, it would be a rematch of their 2018 World Cup game when they got eliminated by South Korea 2-0. That would be an insane rematch. Cape Verde could honestly pull off a bit of an upset in this one, but again, same with Group G, like Germany are just kind of the clear favorites here. I don't think it'd be too much of a fight for them. Moving on to Group I, we have France, Iran, Denmark as the UEFA playoff path D winners, and South Africa. I think this would be really easy for France. I think Denmark, if they can pull off an upset in the playoffs and really like show that they have some momentum going into next year's World Cup, they can maybe get 2nd. But I think again, this is just another example of just France having a really easy group and just another European team being the favorite. So that one's okay. Group J would have Spain, Egypt, Australia, and Turkey as the playoff path C winners. This would actually be a really interesting group. I think that Spain-Turkey game would be really good because they did play each other in the European qualifiers, and those are some great games. I think Egypt could pull off a bit of an upset, maybe Australia. I honestly don't hate Group J. I think this would actually be really interesting to watch. Moving on to Group K, we have Belgium, Haiti, Qatar, and Ecuador. Nothing too crazy here. I think Belgium and Ecuador are pretty level, so the fight for first place would be pretty interesting. But Qatar and Haiti, I don't really think they would win any matches in this group. So it'd be really a fight for first and second. And then Group L would have England, Morocco, Curacao, and Scotland. This would actually be really interesting to see. That England-Scotland rivalry would be really interesting. We would be able to see if Morocco still have their momentum from 2022, and Curacao as one of the debutants playing their first ever World Cup. This would be pretty interesting as well. So this draw isn't too bad. I'd say my favorite group is probably Group A: Mexico, Ivory Coast, Japan, and Italy. Canada, New Zealand, Norway, Senegal are probably my third favorite, and then the rest are pretty one-sided. Maybe Portugal, Colombia, Ghana, Panama would be interesting to see, but the rest are a bit one-sided. So this is the first simulation. This is the first run. It's honestly not the worst, but I think we can do better in the second one. So let's see how the second one pans out. Alright, so now that we know how the simulator works, we're going to zoom through the second and third run here. So let's simulate the second run. Let's see who makes it out of the playoffs. Italy again, Ukraine again, Turkey again, and Denmark again, and DR Congo and Iraq. Okay, so this simulator kind of just says the same thing for the playoffs. So I guess we're just going to go with that. Let's look at the groups though. We have in Group A, we have Mexico, South Africa, Colombia, and Denmark. This would be really good. A rematch of the 2010 World Cup opening game, I believe, was Mexico, South Africa. So that would be really good. You throw Colombia in there, you throw Denmark in there. That would be honestly the group of death, as we've seen so far. Group B has Canada, Italy, Scotland, and Ecuador. This would be really good. I think the Canada-Scotland match would be really good. I think they're pretty level in terms of skill. Throwing Italy in there is going to be a wild card. No one really knows how they're going to play if they make it next year, and Ecuador were really impressive in the CONMEBOL qualifiers. So Group B is also very good here. Group C has England, Morocco, Iraq, and Norway. Another three-way fight for first place would be really sick. I think England, Morocco, or Norway could easily top the group here. And seeing the two teams in the UEFA qualifiers who went undefeated, who won all 8 matches between England and Norway, would make for a great game. So honestly, the first 3 groups here are actually really good. They'd be really interesting. Moving on to Group D, we have the US, we have Paraguay, Japan, and Turkey. This would honestly be more of a test for the US than the last group in the first run. I think it would be really interesting to see how they match up against Japan and Turkey. Paraguay could maybe throw in a bit of a surprise at their first World Cup since 2010, I believe. But yeah, it's not bad. So these first 4 groups honestly have been pretty solid. Group E would have Brazil, the DR Congo, Qatar, and Croatia. Now this would be really spicy because Brazil and Croatia played in the 2022 World Cup, I believe, in the quarterfinals, and that game went to penalties. I remember that game very specifically. So this would be really good, but between DR Congo and Qatar, again, it wouldn't be anything too crazy. So this would be a 2-way fight for first place. In Group F, we have Belgium, Uruguay, Jordan, and Algeria. Honestly, not bad. I think Belgium or Uruguay can maybe top this group. I think Jordan can maybe snatch a point against Algeria, and maybe they probably finish at the bottom of the group, but this one's not bad either. Group G has France, Uzbekistan, Switzerland, and Cape Verde. Another super easy group for France, especially considering how they've been playing lately. I think they would win all 3 games in this one, but seeing Uzbekistan and Cape Verde, 2 debutant nations, play at their first ever World Cup would be pretty sick. Group H has the Netherlands, Ukraine, Panama, and Senegal. This one's not too bad either. Obviously, Netherlands and Senegal played at the group stages in the 2022 World Cup, and that was a pretty solid game. Throwing in Ukraine there would be interesting. I don't think Panama would do particularly well in this group either. So that's Group H. Group I would have Argentina, Austria, Ghana, Saudi Arabia. That would be really interesting to see. We keep seeing Argentina versus Australia in these simulations. That would be a really good match. Ghana versus Austria would be a good test as well, but again, Saudi Arabia could maybe snatch a point, maybe get a win against Argentina like they did in 2022. That would be the second craziest upset at the World Cup group stage. So not bad either there. And then Group J has Portugal, Ivory Coast, South Korea, Curacao. That's pretty interesting. I remember Portugal and Ivory Coast played at the 2010 World Cup in the group stage. That was a solid encounter. South Korea could maybe finish second here, depending how fit their players are going to next year's World Cup. I don't really see Curacao doing a whole lot against one of these 3 teams, so I think it'd be pretty tough for them to come away with any points in that group. But still a pretty solid Group J. Group K has Spain, Haiti, Tunisia, and Iran. This is probably the easiest group that Spain could possibly imagine. I think they would destroy everyone in this group by a large margin. But that fight for second place would be really interesting between Tunisia, Iran. Haiti can maybe throw in a crazy upset somewhere along the way, but Spain would have a walk in the park in this group. And then Group L has Germany, Australia, New Zealand, and Egypt. Another super easy group for Germany. I'd be shocked if they didn't win all 3 games in this one. So yeah, honestly, Run 2 was pretty good. I was a big fan of Group A, Group B, and Group C. I honestly think England, Morocco, Iraq, Norway would make the craziest group that we've seen so far. So honestly, run 2 was definitely better than run 1. Let's see how run 3 does. Alright, so we're on the third and final run of this video. We're going to simulate this one more time and we're going to see what run 3 gives us for the 12 groups. So let's look at the playoffs. We have Italy again, we have Ukraine again, we have Turkey again, we have Denmark again, we have DR Congo again, and we have Iraq. Alright, so if you're going to do this, if you're going to use this website for the simulations, just keep in mind that I think the playoffs are kind of set the way they are. So that's just a little disclaimer. But let's look at the groups here. So we have Mexico, Egypt, Colombia, and Ukraine making up Group A. That would be really good. I think a Mexico-Colombia match would be sick. Egypt could throw in a bit of a surprise there, maybe Ukraine. So honestly, Group A is kind of a toss-up on who finishes first. Group B has Canada, Turkey, Tunisia, and Croatia. Canada and Croatia playing again like it is in 2022 would be pretty sick. I think that like a good match between Canada and Turkey would be a really good game to see what they're made of. And then Tunisia would probably finish last here. Group C has France, Japan, the DR Congo, and Paraguay. Finally, France has a bit of a challenge in one of these simulations. I think like France, Japan would be a really good game. They would maybe stumble against Paraguay. So Group C is pretty solid there. Group D has the United States, Scotland, Morocco, and New Zealand. This would be really interesting. I genuinely don't think the US would top this group. I think Morocco probably would. Scotland, just like they did in the European qualifiers, they could surprise us all, maybe finish in second place here. So honestly, yeah, these first 4 groups aren't too bad. Looking at Group E, we have Spain, Italy, South Korea, and South Africa. This would be a really interesting group. I think Spain versus Italy, a Euro 2012 final rematch would be sick to see. Throwing in South Africa and South Korea, they're 2 wildcard teams. You never really know what South Korea can cook up. South Africa's first World Cup in quite a while could also be pretty interesting. I'm a big fan of Group E here as well. Moving on to Group F, we'd have Germany, Uruguay, Jordan, Algeria. I think Germany would have a bit of a struggle against Uruguay, but I don't think it would be anything too crazy. They'd probably comfortably beat Jordan and Algeria, so that fight for first place would probably just be between Germany. But who gets second here? Honestly, that would be anyone's guess, so not a bad group either. Group G would have Belgium, Uzbekistan, Senegal, and Haiti. I think that Belgium-Senegal game would be really interesting to see how that one turns out. Uzbekistan could also maybe pull off an upset. I think that would be pretty good as well. That Belgium-Uzbekistan game would be very interesting to see. So I'm a fan of Group G as well. Group H would have England, Iraq, the Ivory Coast, and Austria. That would be a pretty solid group as well. I still think England's the best team in this one. I don't really think they would drop any points. But in that fight for second place between Austria and the Ivory Coast, that would be pretty interesting to see as well. Group I has the Netherlands, Australia, Cape Verde, and Norway. That would be a tough test for the Netherlands, honestly, containing this Norwegian side that did super well in the UEFA qualifiers. Cape Verde could probably like make an upset against Australia if they were the better side in that one. So that'll be pretty interesting to see as well. Group J has Portugal, Saudi Arabia, Ecuador, and Ghana. This is actually a really interesting group here. That Portugal-Ghana game, I believe they played in 2022 in the group stage as well. And that was actually a really sick game. Portugal versus Ecuador. Honestly, if Ecuador can steal a win there against Portugal, that would really spice up this group. Saudi Arabia are kind of the outliers here. I'm not really too sure what they'll be able to do in this one. Group K has Argentina, Curacao, Qatar, and Switzerland. This would be super easy for Argentina. But it would be pretty interesting to see what Curacao can do here. I think they could honestly maybe get a win against Qatar, maybe even draw with Switzerland, but I think Argentina would easily run away with this group. And then to finish things off, you have Group L, which has Brazil, Iran, Denmark, and Panama. Again, a very easy group for Brazil, even if they aren't at their top of the form right now. That game against Denmark would probably be their biggest challenge, but against the other 2 teams, they'd probably win. So that is the 3rd run here. So we've done the 3 runs now. And I think, honestly, my favorite one was the second one. If we look at the second run here, this probably had the strongest groups. Yeah, like Group A, Mexico, South Africa, Colombia, Denmark. That would be amazing. Canada, Italy, Scotland, Ecuador. Who knows how that group could play out. England, Morocco, Iraq, Norway. We have a 3-way fight for first place. That would be sick. The US, Paraguay, Japan, Turkey. That would be pretty interesting as well. Brazil, DR Congo, Qatar, Croatia. We have a 2022 quarterfinal rematch. That would be a good storyline to follow. Belgium, Uruguay, Jordan, Algeria. That would be pretty straightforward for Belgium. Group G, France, Uzbekistan, Switzerland, Cape Verde. That would be alright. Netherlands, Ukraine, Panama, Senegal. That would be a good group. Argentina, Austria, Ghana, Saudi Arabia in Group I. That would be a really interesting one as well. And then Group J, Portugal, Ivory Coast, South Korea, Curacao. Like, out of all these groups, none of them aren't even that bad. They all have like their own little flair to it, which I really like. Group K is Spain, Haiti, Tunisia, Iran. I mean, this one would be very easy for Spain. I think that's the only one that I think would be a walk in the park for them. And then Germany, Australia, New Zealand, Egypt, that would also be pretty simple. So out of the 12 groups in the second simulation, I think only 2 of them, maybe 3 of them would be like pretty straightforward. The rest would all have at least one sort of curveball going into it. So yeah, that is the simulation for the World Cup. I think this is the one I'm going to stick with. And honestly, if this is how it turns out, I wouldn't be too upset. I would actually be really looking forward to Canada versus Italy and a bunch of other games here, so I'm happy with the second run. But what did you think of these World Cup simulations? Out of the 3 runs, which one was your favorite and which opening match would you most be looking forward to? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more football content, tier lists, and everything in between, and as always, I'll catch you next time.